May 20, 2018. Accessing Divine Ideas. Neil Worthington, licensed Unity teacher and spiritual leader at Unity of Payson, Arizona.
Thank you to Sue. I have fond memories of classes, both Tom and I have fond memories of classes with Sue and some of the exercises we did. They were a whole lot of fun. But we got down to that, which you capsulized as you led us in meditation, expressing the divine that we are. And that's what I'd like to talk about today, accessing divine ideas, and I'd like to put it this way, living into the divine and living out the divine. So we're going to look at it two ways. Only 2 points to this message today. I know you're supposed to have 3, but I could only come up with 2. So let me start this way. Let me tell a story. It's a story about Big Jim and Little Jimmy. Big Jim was father. And he was, such a man. Tall, caring, intelligent, and everybody loved Big Jim. Athletic, he just had it all the pieces. And then along came Little Jimmy. And Little Jimmy, of course, experienced mothering love, but also fathering love. And excuse me that I'm telling the story from a male perspective, but that's what I know best, so that's what I'm doing. So it's Big Jim and Little Jimmy. But translate it if you want to make it Big Jane and Little Jane or whichever. We're good at translating in unity because often we see spiritual truth, but we have to translate it a little bit because where we come from is that place where we're really taking it within, and it doesn't always work in some of the terms that we've used in the past. So translate this if you will. So Big Jim and Little Jimmy. Well, as Little Jimmy grew beyond that baby stage, he sort of looked up to Big Jim and began to idolize Big Jim. Now, Big Jim was not necessarily a eminent member of the community, but he was because he worked for Streets and Sanitation, and he fixed the roads and the potholes. And every once in a while, Jimmy would go and see Daddy working, and Daddy had a shovel and he was filling in a hole, or he had a rake and he was raking some asphalt. So Little Jimmy saw Big Jim, and guess what showed up in the sandbox? Shovels and rakes. And Little Jimmy began to look a bit like a miniature version of Big Jim. And of course, Big Jim would come home at night, tired, have dinner, and then go to his recliner with a book. And Big Jim was always learning. So even before he could read, guess what Little Jimmy had in his hands? A book. Big Jim was a basketball player. And Little Jimmy got to go and see Daddy play basketball. And guess what turned up in the backyard? This small version of a basketball hoop. And Little Jimmy attempted to become that version of father. So, Big Jim and Little Jimmy, not a surprise that the man who created, in some sense, this small version, people began to say, oh, it's the spitting image of his father. Or, oh, that's just like Big Jim. So that creative force came into this small package And then it even got carried on further because little Jimmy, when he would play with modeling clay, would create a even smaller version of Jim, Jimmy, or Jimette, or whatever Jim is. And that little version had a shovel and a rake made out of twigs. Little version had a book to read. Little version had a basketball. So we see how it went from Big Jim to little Jimmy and was even carried on. There was a stream, a flow through that. So that's our story, and it's told in very human terms. We all understand father, or if it were mother and daughter, or mother and son, and father and daughter, it goes all those ways. We understand how that flow goes from the creative source through the expression. And that's what we're going to talk about today. However, I'm going to ask you to stretch just a little bit and to move away from that anthropomorphic understanding, the Father-Son image. And we find that in Scripture a lot, and we find it in our religion, the Father and Son. But let's go to a more cosmic approach to this. And let's think of something that we're all... Did you feel the energy when we were singing together? Wow, it was an energy. It was palpable. It was really something, but it wasn't personal. Yeah, there were people there, but there was an energy. There was something beyond the personal. And let's think of the divine now as energy, maybe not this specific energy, but an energy that pervades us from start to finish and is not especially personal. So we don't necessarily think in terms of the way we've always thought. We have to adopt a newer perspective. So are you with me? We're moving away from the anthropomorphic and we're moving to a cosmic sense. And when we do that, let's think of this as energy, as I said, but let's do two more things. Let's think of this as, we'll use the word God. I haven't used it yet. But let's think of this as a wonderful, impersonal God, and us as an expression of that God. Or we might say a different word than God. And I'm going to choose one today, and hang with me on this. I'm going to choose source. Source, that energy from which everything comes, where it all comes from, and that source moves through our experience on into the expression that we are as expressions of the divine. So, source is not a person who gives us something over here. Source is an energy that extends through all of our existence. And it's a unified source, if you will. We know that, step back to our bodies for a minute, we know that our bodies have connections through all of the cells and the neurons and everything, that we're all a unity, if you will, bodily. And how many neurons do we have and how many neural connectors are there? We can hardly conceive of that. But now step back, zoom out, if you will, and think of the divine, of all that is, of source, as having those same sort of connections within that unity, extending in and through us. So we have a unimaginable, almost grand, on the scale that we can't even conceive, but we're trying to back up just a little bit today and to look at it that way. So when we look at source as the energy of all that is, we look at four things that we're familiar with, and we'll just rehearse them real quickly. The omnis. Give me the omnis that we know about. Somebody give me one. Omnipresent. Well, let's do that last. What else? This all-knowing. This just resonates with us. Omnipotent, all-powerful, and I've added another one. I may have to tell you this one. Betty got it. Omnibeneficent, all good, and all present. So this energy that has this very nature, all good, all powerful, all knowing, all present, extends from that biggest sense of anything that we can have all the way through our experience. And so we go from the point of looking toward a God or a source of realizing we're just part of that whole thing. We are not separate from it in any sense. And we may, in fact, even have abilities to move back into that divine in ways that we have not known we were capable of navigating. So let's, because I've been going from left to right here, let's put a line kind of down the center here. And we're going to call this the line of demarcation between the source side of it and the us side of it. And on this side we have something that's absolute. That absolute good, that absolute knowing. And on this side of it we have something that's relative. That's the world we live in every day. We end up viewing the world. Our world appears as we are in a very real sense. So we're working on a relative basis. And normally there's a veil here at this demarcation line. We don't get to easily, without preparing ourselves, reach over into the absolute. But the wonderful thing that we've learned is that there is not only our conscious mind, which we work with over here, and our subconscious mind that works with us, but there's also a superconscious mind, which is part of us. We, as created as we are, we have that as well. So we reach beyond that veil into the superconscious for divine ideas. Well, over here, functioning on this relative reality, this relative side, we make it all up. We figure it out. We put it together, and we sometimes put it together, as Maurice pointed out, in ways that don't work very well. Kind of doing it all on our own, freelancing it. And we don't often reach back into the absolute side for that truth that is absolute, that never changes, but that more than anything else inspires us to live out a divine expression. So let's today think about reaching back onto this side that we're normally veiled from. And the question is, how do we do that? Well, you probably know some of the ways that you do it. They may be through a gathering such as this. They may be Sunday morning where that inspiration seeps through and suddenly, oh man, why did I never think of that before? Wow, that's a new way of looking at it. Or it might be on a walk in nature. When you suddenly have this epiphany, something came. And it came from this absolute side. It didn't come from a manufactured process. I was talking with Hal back here, and he says, I've been in manufacturing for 37 years. He knows what it is to make things. And we're good at making things. But sometimes we need to just let the flow of life, the divine flow, be a part of that. Reach back through that veil and bring into our expression of life the divine in a very special way. One other way, the time, I love this time, the time between sleep and waking. The wonderful time to reach back through that veil and pull. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and there's just a word that's there, and I take that word and I know it comes from someplace that I didn't manufacture. Or I look back at something I wrote 8 years ago, and I said, how did I know that? I didn't know that back then. But somehow I was able to reach back through that veil and pull it forward, as you will, into expression. So that's what I call living in the divine. As much as we can, find those places where you can live in the divine. Take dreams, take inspiring literature, take anything, and live in the divine. Because wherever we're living is what's going to show up over here on this relative side. So that's it. Live in the divine and live as the divine over here. Again, we could put it together. We could figure out how to do it. And it might not work. Matter of fact, more than likely it won't. But we can take the tools that we've had that come from the divine ideas over here, that we've learned, those tools that really resonate with our being, and we can put them to work. And you know some of those tools. Well, anybody ever heard of the 12 powers? I bet almost everybody's heard of the 12 powers. Give me a few of those tools that we have to bring these divine ideas, these abilities over into our relative life and live as the divine. Give me one.
Order.
Order.
Understanding.
Understanding.
Will.
Ability to know and perceive. Yes.
Will.
Will. The ability to choose and decide. Another one.
Faith.
Faith. The ability to believe. To intuit as well.
Zeal.
What was it?
Zeal.
Zeal. Oh, that exciting one. Of course, you would do that too. Zeal. That would be the one that you would do. So these are tools, and we won't go into all of them today, but if you hang around Unity very long, you're going to get to know and to use these tools, the 12 powers. But there are others. I imagine if Charles Fillmore was still with us, he would say, maybe I'll change one of those 12 powers and put another one in for a time. Because there are other divine qualities that we recognize. Remember, we're created in that flow of life. We're part of it. We're connected. We recognize within, and don't doubt it, what we know as the divine. And some of those other qualities are there. Let me think of another quality that's not a 12 power that you might think of as a divine quality.
Harmony.
Harmony. Oh, of course you would say that, Mary Ann. Mary Ann has harmony on her license plate. I think it is. It's a little slightly distinctive, but very close to love, too. Another one. Anybody else? Divine quality.
Joy.
Joy. Good one. That goes close to zeal, but it is very special. And I'm learning that. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to say one more. Peace. Peace is a quality. Peace, serenity. So, when we're living as the divine, we're connected. Don't forget, we never lose this connection of living in the divine back through that veil. When we're living as the divine, we take these tools and we express them. Now, even if we know the tools, but we're over here and we're not actively connected with that divine essence that we are part of, if we've kind of turned our back on those connections, it probably won't work very well. Well, we'll express, but might not be the best divine expression. And what I'm proposing today is that we reach through this veil, keep that connection going, take the tools, and then put them to work in our life and live as an expression of the divine. We talk about it all the time. Thank you for your words in the meditations. And the daily word, it all works together today. It just works together. So today as we sit here, think of those two things. Living in the divine and living as the divine, using the tools that resonate with our very being, because we are part of that divine. We're in no sense ever separate from that divine. We are one. And so it is.
Great job. Great job.
And we again, speaking of music,